Hello, District 31 Toastmasters and people who may not be familiar with Toastmasters are watching this video to find out a little more about Toastmasters. This is a video series called the District 31 Club Close-Up, where I interview clubs from District 31 to learn about their clubs, the great things they're doing to engage their existing members, and how they're recruiting new ones. I'm your host, Christian Austin. I am the 2023-2024 District 31 Public Relations Manager. And for today's episode, we have a special treat for you. We have the officers, or some of the officers, I should say, from South Coast Toastmasters. South Coast Toastmasters is a community club in Wareham, Massachusetts. They were founded in 2008, so relatively speaking, they are a newer club compared to some of the clubs we've seen in the past 70 years, 40 years. 2008 is a newer club in reference to that. The club meets both virtually and quarterly. They have in-person meetings as well, so they have a hybrid format for any type of meeting that you are interested in attending. They will provide that format for you. We'll provide additional club information in the show notes and at the end of the video, so don't worry, you'll find out how to visit the South Coast Toastmasters Club. Before we start off, I'd like to congratulate the club for achieving select distinguished status. Let's give them a big round of applause for that.
Thank you.
Select distinguished status, if you're not familiar with it, is earning this club earns 7 out of 10 possible points in different categories within the Distinguished Club program. Tonight, we are going to have an interview in a panel discussion format. Today's chat will be with various aspects of the club, and each of the officers will be a panelist, and I'll serve as the panel moderator. If you've completed a Pathways project, moderate a panel discussion, it'll be very similar to that type of format. If you haven't done that project before, watch the video and you might decide this would be a good project for me to do to complete one of my Pathway projects. So get those notepads out and take down some of the great information you're about to receive. But before we begin, I'd like to ask each of the panelists if they could give us a brief introduction, starting in alphabetical order with Mary Ann Murphy. Mary Ann?
Thanks, Christian. I'm Mary Ann Murphy. I'm a DTM, very proud of that. And I've been in Toastmasters since 2007, and so 16 years. And I've been a member of South Coast Toastmasters since 2010. And I first joined this club actually as a club coach, because back in 2009 or so, the club was doing okay, but was a little small, and they were trying to build their membership. So I came in to try to help them out, and I loved the club so much, I had to become a member. So I've been a member since then.
Thank you for that, Marianne. And that says so much when you come in as a club coach to help the club, you see the potential they have, and you end up joining the club as well. Moving on now to Sydney Murray. Sydney, can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Sydney Murray. I've been with the club about a year, a little bit over, right? I think time flies when you're having fun. And I came across Toastmasters when I was giving a speech, and the person who helped me write the speech, he was a member, and so was his father. And then he said, listen, you're okay. You could do it a little Toastmasters. And then I discovered it, and it was everything and more. So I'm here.
Thank you for that, Sydney. And Toastmasters can help out anyone from any walk of life, any public speaking or leadership experience, and have to commend you being a member for about a year and stepping up to the VP of Public Relations role. Moving on now, last but not least, Stephen Rogers. Stephen, could you give us an introduction, please?
Yes, Stephen Rogers. I joined the club in October 2015. I'm a member of another club in this district and then a third club in a different district. I've done most of the officer roles and have had some district roles. So, working on that leadership stuff.
Great, lots of leadership experience, and I see in your title too. Congratulations on being this year's club president, Stephen.
Oh, man.
All right, moving on now to start our phase of learning from South Coast Toastmasters. Let's open up the panel discussion now that we know our panelists. And for the first question, I'd like to pose a general question about the club. The question is, how would you describe your club? And if it had a motto, what would it be? Would anyone like to answer that question?
Yeah, I'll start with the motto, actually. I think, and we heard this we had a club coach in 2 years ago, and different people have come in and said, this club is kind of small but mighty, and I really liked that. So small but mighty, I think, is a good description of us and motto for us. We're a lunchtime community club and we serve a fairly large geographical area. So unlike some of the Boston clubs, for example, where there are so many Boston clubs, we're serving kind of the whole south coast of Massachusetts. So we have members from as far west as New Bedford, Sydney's in New Bedford, as far north as Plymouth, as far east and south as Harwich on the Cape. So we serve a pretty broad area. But because we're virtual most of the time now, we're also able to welcome people from anywhere around the world. So we're primarily virtual now since the pandemic, but we do welcome members from anywhere. And we started as a corporate club at Lockheed Martin in Marion, and then expanded to be a community club. And again, all over the South Coast, we had several different places that we met in Marion and Wareham, Buzzards Bay, Bourne. So we like to spread ourselves around the South Coast so that people can find us eventually. But small but mighty, I think.
Thanks for that, Marion. I love that motto, small but mighty. It's not quantity, it's quality. And that's the small but mighty motto that you have. Before we move on to anyone else who has a question, I do have one question. Moving from a corporate to a community club, was there a particular reason that you moved from that corporate to community of admitting anyone who wanted to join the club?
Yeah, it was partly because Lockheed Martin was downsizing a lot because things were changing economically and they had lost some government contracts. So the numbers of people available in Marion at the corporate location was being reduced, and we lost a bunch of our members because either they got transferred or they moved out of the company. But also we were a South Coast club, and there were people who were interested in joining. And there was so much government security because they were doing, aerospace stuff and contracts for the federal government, that it was really challenging to meet at their location. We had one person who wanted a visit from Canada, and he couldn't come in because he didn't have the right paperwork. So it became a lot easier just to open it up to the broader community and to meet out in the community instead of at the corporate headquarters there.
A lot of good points there with clubs that are in a situation where they're corporate, and as you said, Marion, maybe you're downsizing, maybe it's just hard to recruit. That is an option to turn into that community club. And I know, as you said, with Lockheed Martin, there's some difficulty accessing the facility as well. So a couple of ideas to keep in mind: if you're having trouble with guests, having trouble with recruiting or membership, maybe consider becoming a community club. Would anyone else like to add anything about the club motto?
I always think of it as a very tenacious club. The meetings always occur. All the roles are filled. No matter what's going on, we just make it work and have fun. So that's what, keeps people coming back.
Absolutely does. Getting those meeting rules filled and having an organized meeting where guests are going to come in and say, wow, this club really has its act together. That's the way you recruit people as well.
Right.
Organization can't be understated. All right,
Yeah,
let's move
there have
on.
been a number of times where Stephen or I, the day before will say, okay, I guess I got to write a speech tonight because there's an open speech slot and we have visitors coming. So we got to get something, something there. And we take it very seriously that we have a responsibility, I think, to the community to be there. If we say we're going to be there on the second and fourth Thursday at noon, we're going to be there and we're going to be ready and have a meeting put together that works.
And Marianne, that's a great point. I've seen that in other clubs, in my club as well. As a leader of your club, you're a role model. And if you say there's going to be a meeting and it's going to be a well-organized meeting and that speech slot is not filled, it's up to the officers to make sure that it's filled, that meeting is run and it's run in a very organized way. The other thing that I found about that, I'm wondering, I'll ask both of you, in having to fill that speaking slot when there's nobody signed up and you have a meeting right around the corner, do you feel that also helps you become a better speaker, not just a leader, and having to put that speech together pretty quickly and get comfortable with maybe not getting as much practice as you'd like to?
Most certainly. Anything that happens is an educational experience. So there's nothing that can really bad happen at a meeting, because no matter what does happen, you're either learning how to communicate better, or you're learning how to lead better, or you're just learning how to roll with the punches of life, which allows you to do everything better.
And I think, we talk about that sometimes in the meeting, especially for the Toastmaster. The Toastmaster can make sense of things like that, for visitors in particular, but really for all of us, by saying, okay, so that was interesting, that happened, and that's why we're here. We're here to learn how to run meetings well and to figure out what to do when something goes wrong or when something isn't quite perfect, and to support each other through it so that we'll do it again and do it better the next time.
Sydney.
That was great, about support, because a lot of times it is about supporting each other, and a small group like this, it becomes a family. So even if I can't do a speech and I'm at work and everything's going crazy, I'll go on my lunch break and just be there to support, to help give a review. And then I'll hear my boss going, "What's going on?" I'm like, "Oh, there you go, everybody. Thank you for the great speech." So it is about that support. When you have a family and everybody works very well, and we lean on each other, and that's part of it. And that's part of the push when I do talk to people and give them a little soft story about why they should join Toastmasters.
And going back to the motto, small but mighty, that's what makes it small but mighty, right? It operates as a family. Everyone's comfortable with each other. They get along, and they know if you bond together, that small army of people will create something that appears to be a much, much bigger organization.
Yep.
All right, let's move on and talk a little about education now. The club performed fantastically getting that select distinguished, because partially you had 9 completed pathway levels this year in the Distinguished Club program. I'd like to know, how are you encouraging members to give pathway speeches and complete projects in base camp? So 2 parts, how are you getting members to give those pathway speeches? And then the second aspect is, if they give a speech, are they going into base camp and actually completing that project formally in base camp?
Yeah, I think a big part of it this year was that we made a commitment at the beginning of the year that we were going to get select distinguished. Or I forget whether we claimed we could make presidents distinguished or not, but we were going to be distinguished one way or another. So I think making that commitment as a group and really discussing it as a group, that we want to to be a well-rounded club that whose members are moving forward and are developing their skills and are achieving milestones. So that was something that we paid attention to throughout the year and got people to commit to, I'm going to finish a level 3 and a level 4 this year because I'm close to a level 3 and I'm going to get that level 4 also, or whatever it was. So that helped a lot. And I think, to me, that was the most important part, that commitment that we made. And then we reviewed the club's success plan at officer meetings really regularly. And when we noticed that things weren't going the way we had predicted they were going to go, we paid attention and we re-strategized and came up with a different piece of a plan and that was especially regarding membership. And we'll talk about that more, but membership was our challenge. Small but mighty. It's still small, and you have to get that 20 members or a net growth of 3 members, and that had been a challenge for us in the past. So again, reviewing the club success plan really regularly and paying attention to that was a big part of it. Then we do assign people to mentors, and so part of the mentor job is to guide new members into the Pathways program, into Base Camp, help them figure it out, and show them why it's important and how to do it to make it easier. And then we remind speakers at the meetings, if they haven't signed up for a particular project, they're just doing a speech, it's like, no, what project is that going to be associated with? And we make sure that they know that, there are different projects they could do with that same topic. So we do that. And then we acknowledge progress in with achieving levels. We have a quarterly newsletter, and we've given out pins this year for people who have reached different levels, and we acknowledge them at the meetings and give lots of applause. So I think it's a combination of things, but a lot of it is really being committed and attentive to that process. And one other thing is that we have several members, myself and Stephen included, who are members of several different clubs. So we have the opportunity to give speeches at different places. So more than just the twice a month in this club that we can give speeches and still, get credit for this club in Pathways.
Another thing I was going to add, you had mentioned the phrase role model. When members see people giving speeches and surviving it and almost seeming to enjoy it, they start to think, hey, maybe I should, I haven't given a lot of speeches. Maybe I should knuckle down and do some speeches because it looked like they were having fun. And they see the feedback and realize that it's useful. I think sometimes there's a danger in clubs where as soon as they stop filling as much speech roles, it just continues that way because people don't see other people giving speeches. So I think it's really important to just always have speakers because that, keeps the energy going, and it inspires people to give their own speeches, say what they want to say for 5 to 7 minutes.
And that's part of Sydney. Go ahead.
It really is great because when I think about all the different pathways, and I always say, like, I'm one of those Joes off the street, even though I've been here for a while, but in terms of the importance of the pathways. So I'm sitting there giving all these speeches, and it isn't until you realize the importance of the tools, because once I'm not doing the pathways and then I have a speech to give, it'll kick in. I had a speech to give recently, and I get up there and I said, oh, I'm in Toastmasters. I didn't say I'm in Toastmasters, and I'm ready in my mind. I don't need this. I don't need these notes that I usually use. When I got up, then the lights hit me. I go, hi, I'm Sydney. I'm here for present this award. And once I got back, I was like, oh my God, I gotta get back to the pathways. I got comfortable. I was drinking my own Kool-Aid. I'm like, oh, I'm Toastmaster. I got my pin. It should be great. It's like magic. It's osmosis. And then that's when the rubber meets the road. But at the same time, you can convey to people. It makes for a great story about the importance of getting into Toastmasters and then getting on the pathway.
And for people like Sydney, who does a fair amount of speaking outside of Toastmasters, it's, we encourage people to give speeches at Toastmasters that they're going to actually use in their real life, when they're out in the community giving speeches or at their workplace giving speeches. We want to hear those things and help support them so that they can do them as well as possible. And so we'll talk to people about, you're giving, so Sydney might talk about, I'm going to be on a panel discussion. Well, there's actually a Toastmasters project for that. Maybe you should, try to check out that project in Pathways before you do the panel discussion. So it's really helpful, I think, when, as Sydney talked about, feeling like a family, knowing each other and what we're kind of trying to accomplish with our speaking and our leadership skills can help us then support each other in that way too, of knowing Pathways well enough to be able to recommend a specific project to someone for a speech they're going to give outside.
And I will text Marianne after I gave that bad speech, and I'm like, oh my God. Why didn't I look at the last email you sent me about that? I said, Bomb Central. Thank God nobody recorded it. So it is that family thing where I'm just like, that was the first person I texted after I got to stage. I'm sitting at the table. I'm like, Marianne.
And that, Sydney, reinforces the concept of community. You can go to Marianne and you could say that because you're comfortable with Marianne, you're comfortable with the club. All about being comfortable, giving those speeches and growing that way. If you're scared, you think people are going to criticize you, you don't have that community feel, you're not going to go to the meeting and push yourself a little further out of that comfort zone. And that's what provides the improvement. So along that pathway, along those projects, continue to work those and continue to improve with the members in your club as well. And then the other point of that, Marianne, just to step back, you mentioned that you have a mentoring program as well, which creates that community feel, creates some encouragement for people to continue Pathways when the mentor is asking the protege what they're doing, or just encouraging them to go along those paths. How are you connecting mentors and proteges in the club? Is there an interview process? Is there a matching of some sort? How does that typically work within South Coast Toastmasters?
Yeah, not so much. It's not such a formal process, really. It's and part of it is we want to ideally match new members with people who are well into Pathways and have enough experience to really be able to guide someone through getting into base camp and doing all that kind of stuff. It's a lot of just, okay, who's available, who's willing to do it. The visitors come to the meetings, and when they sign up, sometimes they'll ask a particular person to do it, or sometimes it's just in the past year, the past couple of months, it's been sort of the person who brought that member into the club initially. It seems they already know that person, so it's a natural match that way. So when someone invites someone in, they kind of take responsibility for mentoring that person further. I don't know, Stephen, was there more that we were doing that you were doing that I wasn't aware of?
I just always, yes, you want to make sure that the mentors are comfortable and willing and have the time. But I always want to hear more from the person that is looking for a mentor, because it's got to be someone they're interested in working with. So it's, matching personalities. You want that chemistry there, that they're willing to open up to that person and admit that they're confused or scared or troubled or whatever, so that they can get the help that they need.
And that is a very important part of that relationship. And as Marianne said, if you're matching up with the person who originally brought the guest, matching the guest up with that, there's probably some sort of pre-existing relationship where they are communicating, they're friendly with each other. And that's just good advice in general. If there is that pre-existing relationship, it may be a good mentor-protege relationship within the club as well. The last thing I wanted to ask before we move on to membership, we have a lot of membership questions I want to ask you, is you mentioned looking at the club success plan, which is a really important document to draft up around this time of year for the club to look forward, to put down the goals, what you're planning on achieving. But you mentioned reviewing that club success plan and potentially pivoting if something wasn't going the way you expected it to. How often would you review the club success plan, and when would you review it?
It was every couple of months, and I just went to a district officer training about the club success plan, and there's a lot of talk about how you put it together and how you write the goals appropriately and all that kind of stuff, which is really important. But yeah, I've been in a couple of clubs, and I think unless you actually use the plan and review it regularly, who cares? So sometimes I think people can just do the club success plan because we're supposed to do it, and the area director is going to ask us about it if we don't get it in, and then they don't follow up on it. But yeah, so every other month or so I would I'd put it on the agenda for the club officer meeting, and sometimes there wasn't a lot to say, but usually there was some piece of it that felt like we were not handling as much as we could, and it needed adjustment. So yeah, pretty often.
Yeah, and putting it on the agenda so that it doesn't get forgotten as well, and routinely doing that. Great point. You may think in your head, well, there's not much to review here. You put it on the agenda and you have a discussion with other officers, and you find out, yeah, there's a lot more to discuss here than I thought there was. Let's move on now to membership. As I said, we have several questions here, and I do want to find out how you're managing membership, being that small but mighty club that you are. And my first question is related to marketing and recruiting. So the club this year, you recruited 4 new Toastmaster members, which is quite considerable given that you have 12 members total. What are some of the marketing methods that are working well to recruit members? And what tips can you give on recruiting members?
Well, Sydney was in charge of PR, so I'll let him talk to that.
It's interesting. Part of that whole understanding of how to recruit and marketing is about knowing your area. I said there's nothing more important than that, knowing the demographics and really knowing what's going on. So I always say that's all about creating relationships. So the more people you meet, the more people you talk to, you're creating those relationships and explaining what is Toastmaster. And I always say part of that is also knowing who your competition is. So if I'm always looking around, there'll be, oh, we're having this person come and speak, and they wrote this book. And I looked to see who they were, and they wrote like an ebook. And so it was a one-off. And then I thought, I work with Toastmasters. I said, I'm in Toastmasters. And then they go, oh, really? And then you sort of explain the history of Toastmasters. And that's a key part of it. And I always say the most important part of that, not only is the education component that Toastmasters provides, and all the tools they provide for marketing, but telling your story. And whenever I get a chance, I'm doing all this speaking. I'll have my Toastmasters pin on. And when I talk to people, they'll say, what was your story? And I have a great story. I'll make it real quick because it involves the mentorship and everything else. So I do Toastmasters. I said a year. It's probably been over that. I'm very bad with time. It's probably my second year as PR. But I was up for a promotion during COVID. And so I'm running around and I'm getting all my stuff together. And on a whim, I said, let me reach out to Mary Ann. I said, she's brilliant. I said, I talk to her all the time. I have this great relationship. And I said, Mary, I got this interview coming up. And I said, this is a key position. And so she offered, she's like, well, I'll help you. And I was like, really? And it was part of that whole, when you were in the family, you have all these people who have all this experience and they can help you. And she went over and all these key things that I had missed because my interview was going to be on Zoom. So it was great to work with her. Needless to say, I did get the promotion. I got the promotion. And so, but it was because I felt confident. I had that relationship. She was able to work with me and use her years of experience. And I tell people about that. I said, Toastmasters can also be a support network. It's a family. So if you want to, you can join to work on your speaking. You can join to help get to that next stage. And part of that is part of the marketing. Aside from, like I said, we're knowing the area, listening and taking temperatures in terms of what's going on. Like I'll give you an example, like there's an entrepreneurship group. And these people need to know how to speak. Some of these people, they're starting their own business and they might not have had experience in college in speaking. They might not have had experience in high school in speaking. And I said, what better than Toastmasters to start learning how to speak, whether it's speaking to a group or speaking to even to your customers or your clients or your employees. So that's part of how you start getting the word out. We get the flyers out, we get the press releases, and Toastmasters has a treasure trove of templates to use. And I said, you don't want to reinvent the wheel. At first I thought, well, I'm going to reinvent the wheel. They said, why would you do that? What, are you gonna make it square? So it's just to have those resources and have that support makes it an easy sell or an easy pitch to do recruiting. And I think this year is, now that we're out of COVID, it's a little bit easier because the more people you meet and the more, engagement that you speak at, and the bigger they are, the more people I can talk to, because if they hear you speaking well, they go, oh, you speak very well. And then what do I attribute it to? I'm in Toastmasters, I'm the VP of Public Relations. So, can I help you? And then you sort of take the temperature because some people are hesitant and they're like, well, I don't have the time or, this and that. I said, work around your schedule. I said, come in noon for a little break. And I know I'm rambling a little bit, but that is part of the magic of promoting Toastmasters, letting people know about the track record, the thousands of people, the network, and everything else that just comes with it. It's not just a one-off, it's a family.
Sydney, so many great points there I really picked on tell your story. You're having people tell you their story, you're telling people your story, and you just told us your story now. If anyone listening to this wasn't inspired by the fact that Toastmasters helped Sydney land that job interview because he was able to reach out to Mary Ann, part of the family, and get some advice on how to execute that interview the best way possible. If that doesn't inspire you about Toastmasters, I don't know what story is going to inspire you. So that inspiration right there, telling your story, that word of mouth, and bringing somebody into the club because they said, I can relate with Sydney. I think I should go visit the club too, because what that club did for Sydney is something that I need. Great recruiting tip. And then the other thing you mentioned, Toastmasters has so much marketing material. As you said, I could reinvent the wheel, but why am I going to reinvent the wheel when it's all right there for me to utilize and customize for the club that you're in, South Coast or whatever other Toastmasters club it is? Utilize those resources that Toastmasters International puts out there for you to advertise your club. Would anyone else like to say anything about marketing and recruiting? Steven.
What Sydney's talking about is like making people aware about Toastmasters and what it can do for them. And then step is they look for more information. and they usually go to the Toastmasters website or they go to the club website. Toastmasters put out a stat a few years ago that 60% of the people who ask for more information never hear from the club. And that's a very simple thing a club can do. If you want more members, answer the people who say, I want more information. And also, send them, don't just answer the question about when the next meeting is, follow up, a day or two before and say, just wanted to remind you, we're meeting. If they do attend, you follow up afterwards so that you give them that sense that even though you're not a member, we're here for you. We're trying to help you and see that your needs are being met. So I think that's a second, important step in that, bringing guests in. And then I always think you can't say any of the most important, but one of the very important things is just always putting on a great meeting. Because I think anyone that has any interest in Toastmasters at all, if they go to a great meeting, there's no way they wouldn't join, because it just blows their mind. They're always so impressed at how efficient everything is, how much fun everyone's having, how relaxed people are, how supportive they are. And when you create that environment, that family environment, of course they want to join.
Yeah, and if I could say, we also spent some time this year really thinking about who we wanted to attract, that we really targeting, and Sydney was talking about sort of knowing your environment, knowing your community. And one of since we had heard different people who were looking for a job or looking to change jobs, one of the groups that we talked about was unemployed people or people who were in the process of changing jobs, which during the pandemic was everyone. I mean, who was not looking to change their job during the pandemic? So we made a point. We did 2 open houses this year, and I think open houses are really critical. We definitely got members through having the open houses. That was a very important piece of our strategy. But we targeted them. So the first one we did in January, we invited a specialist in job change, who was someone I had worked with 15 years ago when I was job changing. And we had him come as a guest speaker. And part of the goal there was, and the focus was, the topic or the theme was interviewing skills. And we made it a little broad, so it didn't have to be interviewing for a new job. It could be any kind of interviewing you wanted to do. But we really wanted to focus on people who were either unemployed or looking to change jobs. And by inviting that speaker, we hoped to get his connections so that he would talk about it with all his people who may or may not have known about Toastmasters. And the flyers that Sydney designed, and the press release, the things we put out there, the social media we put out there, was all focused on people who are looking to improve their interview skills. And we contacted unemployment offices and career counselors who would know people who needed to improve their interview skills. And we just really focused it all that way. Because of course, anybody could come to the open house. Everybody could use interview skills at some point. But we made a point of focusing on and targeting these particular groups. And I think it made a big difference, because when you try to appeal to everybody all at once, you don't end up appealing to anybody. And I learned that as a small business owner, that you had to really target things. So that was a big piece for us, I think, this year, in making a difference. And we looked at a couple of different things. We looked at diversity, increasing the diversity in our club, small business owners, managers, and salespeople. Those are people who probably would be committed to speaking more effectively, communicating more effectively. And like with managers who might have employees under them who they could refer, because we see that all the time in Toastmasters. My boss told me I could use Toastmasters. So we wanted to reach those people. The second open house that we did, we focused on doing hybrid meetings. We did it as a hybrid meeting, and hybrid meetings are hard. So we thought, let's focus on that. Let's talk about how you can learn how to do hybrid meetings better at a Toastmasters meeting. And we talked about before, sometimes things don't go perfectly, and they didn't, true to form. But we were able to talk about it then, what worked about this meeting and what didn't work, and what would you do differently in your situation? How could you make the camera setup and the sound and all that? And we had handouts. Stephen prepared handouts about how we actually had the room set up and how we had, where we had the different microphones and lights and all that kind of stuff, so that we were doing a hybrid meeting, but we were also talking about how to do a hybrid meeting at the same time. I thought it was a really cool event. Both of those were really cool events.
Stephen, Sydney.
I think it's great. Also, some things that we talk about is, the triage. A lot of it, you always want to take the temperature. Why? How did the person come to Toastmasters? What did we do to get you here? And a lot of it also is when you're meeting people where they're at. I learned that from, I was chairman for the Red Cross in Massachusetts for a little bit, for about 2 years. And it's always about, people have a million reasons why. And a lot of it's fear of doing something new. They might know they need something like Toastmasters, but they have all those reasons why. They're like, well, I can't go in person. I said, well, good news. We're also hybrid. They go, oh, really? Well, I don't have like $200. I said, what do you need that for? So they and then you start creating a relationship and making them comfortable, and then start talking about, what do you need? Where are you? Like Marianne talked about how you had a lot of people who were looking at transition, and a lot of people were starting their own business. So, this is what Toastmasters provides. And when they hear it, they're like, I didn't know that. That's one of the key things I always hear about. I didn't know Toastmasters. I've heard about it. But you hear executives who'll be like, I've heard about it. I didn't know it really existed. And so that, again, is a time to tell your story and a time to say how they can be part of the family, as opposed to, how can you come here? We're going to help you. Because people don't like to be helped. That's another outreach thing. They're like, I don't need help. Nothing wrong with me. And that's like change. I don't need to be changed. Well, evolution is good. It's part of the growth process. So again, you sort of soft pedal the great things that Toastmasters can do. And that's part of what it is. Even whether it's recruiting or retention, even when we do the outreach, if we have a member who hasn't been in for a while, you send a nice email and just to sort of say, well, I hope everything's okay. And they'll be like, oh, wow. You check in on me to see how I'm doing? No, you check on me to see when I'm coming back. No, we always want you back, but how are you doing? Is everything okay? And then they respect that. And then those are the people who come back because they'll remember they really care about it. This really is my family. They care enough to see how I'm doing. Everything was going crazy, but I'm going to come back. So those are the things that, we like, or we strive to, or we create in a small group with a family setting.
A lot of points there with going back to the family, right? And as Stephen said, if somebody reaches out to the club, the first step, right, is to make sure you get back to them, then follow up with them, and then you don't have to sell them on anything becoming a member. You show them a great meeting that's organized, that you have a community feel, that you're all family and you help each other. There's no selling that needs to be done at that point. They're going to see it, and by leading by example, they're going to want to follow. I'd like to move on and talk about guests. This is what we just talked about with Stephen, with people reaching out, the follow-up process. I'd like to know a little more about what the club does to welcome those guests that do come to the meetings, and what sort of follow-up do you do with them to make sure that they understand when there's an additional meeting and if they need any information? Is there any system that you have in place? Anything you could provide with details would be fantastic.
I guess so. I always follow up, with an email thanking them for being there. We ask in the meeting what their experience was, but I also ask that in an email. I attach an application, but emphasize just if you're interested, you're welcome to keep coming back as a guest. And I send them reminders of meetings for the next probably 2 months, because often, me personally, I'm very uncomfortable with that. But I find that a lot of people say, yeah, I had a few busy weeks, so I missed 2 meetings. So I'm glad you reminded me, because now I can come back. So I've had to grow and continue to reach out to people, even though it made me uncomfortable.
The process, right? It's not just speaking. That's part of the leadership growth as well. And I have to say, I personally had that problem as well. Am I bothering that person? Am I spamming them with email? But you brought up a good point. They missed the meetings, not because they're ignoring you. It's because they had other obligations. I know personally, I've lost emails as well. And somebody sends me an email. I think it's the first one I received. Meanwhile, they sent 3 or 4 to me previously. I'm not ignoring them intentionally. So getting comfortable with sending those reminders out and thinking about doing that person a service rather than bothering them.
Yeah.
And I think what Stephen talked about too, that we do ask for feedback. We always have people introduce themselves, visitors introduce themselves at the beginning of the meeting. We always encourage them to participate in table topics, but no pressure if they don't want to. But it's amazing sometimes, that people are absolutely willing to do it. And then always at the end, one of the last things we do is check in with the visitors and say, so what was this like for you today? Do you have any questions? Since we're on Zoom, we can stay afterwards. And, if you have more questions, if there's a lot, then we stay on the call with them and answer questions and help them get to whatever the next step is. But that seems to really make people feel included, because we do want to include them.
Marianne, and that word inclusion, if the guest shows up to the meeting, you kind of wave to them, they sit off in the corner, they don't really participate, and then you just congregate with all the people in the club and just leave the guest, probably not going to come back. That attention to them, again, the family word makes them feel part of the family and makes them want to come back and learn more about the club. So important.
Right. And whenever there are visitors, we make sure that the Toastmaster or each of the people who are participating in the meeting talk about what they're doing and why we're doing it. And even though the agenda has a lot of that information on it, people aren't necessarily reading that. So we'll make a point of saying, Stephen, you're a new member or you're a visitor. Just so you know, the reason we do this part of the, of the agenda is for this reason. And we, mention their names and include them, not to put them on the spot, but to make them, again, feel that we're paying attention to, we understand that this can be confusing, seeing such a structured agenda. And we want to help them understand what the value is to it, so that they'll want to come back again. And that even if they don't, that they'll enjoy the experience and be able to participate as fully as possible.
Right. Sometimes that agenda, it's clear to us who are familiar with the meetings, and we see speaker number 1, evaluator 1, table topics. It's really clear, but the guests, they're questioning, what is this role all about? It's a table topic. What is a table topic? And having that explanation makes them feel more a part of the meeting. It's like in class when you don't understand what the teacher is saying and you don't want to raise your hand and ask the stupid question. You just preempt all of that and make people feel comfortable. All right, let's move on. We could talk all night. One last question about membership, about retention. You've done a great job in retention. What efforts do you make to retain those members? And can you state any specific examples about member retention?
Yeah, Stephen did some research on comparing our club to other clubs in terms of the percentage of turnover, which is really quite low for us. And I think it's really tricky for a smaller club. And just so people know, we do have 12 members in our club. We're not tiny. We're not tiny, but mighty. We're small, but mighty. But we have a lot of members who have been there a long time. We have one person, I think, still from the Lockheed Martin days when we first started. We just celebrated our 15-year anniversary as a club, so we are proud of that. But yeah, I think that following up, as Stephen said, with people after the meeting, and keeping in touch with people and sort of checking in. Gee, we haven't seen you for a while. We have one member who's been a snowbird, so she's down in Florida half the year and up here part of the year. And we've kept in touch with her. And just recently, she said, "I'm back and I'm coming to a meeting." So I think part of it is just the newsletter that we've done to keep people aware of what's going on, make them feel included, let them know we miss them and want them, to come back, I think makes a difference.
Sydney.
I can speak directly to that because I was ready to leave. I had so much stuff going on. I was taking Z-Quil to go to bed, energy shots to wake up in the morning. I had so many meetings. I was involved in so many things with work, volunteer work, speaking outside and everything else. And I said, Marion, I don't think I can stay. And so it was one of those things where we had a discussion and I realized that, this was a priority. And but at the same time, it wasn't. In my mind, I kept saying, I gotta get the speech. I gotta be on top. I have to have the speech done. I have to do more speeches. I got my path I got to work on. And she was like, calm down. You don't have to do everything. Work. This is your home, and come at your pace. And I realized I was overthinking it. And like I said, I could still come in to support. As opposed to sit there preparing a speech. Or if I had a speech, I could sort of prepare it if I could, but there wasn't the pressure. And a lot of times people will come to Toastmasters and they feel the pressure. I've got to talk. Our club is so good in terms of explaining as opposed to not putting pressure. So it's part of the family where she was able to help me assess where I was at. She wasn't panicking. And she said, just come when you can. And then have that pressure lifted. I said, I'm staying right here. I'm not going anywhere. I'm drinking. I just realized it was a pressure from everything else, mental pressure. And that's another part of having great Toastmasters who are seasoned, who have been everywhere and done a lot of things. So they can sit there and give you the benefit of their experience and they can see what you're going through, or what you're going through, or what you're doing, and say, okay, I'm down. Tell me what's going on. And that's really, again, I keep harping on the whole family thing, but that's part of that great relationship you have with everybody.
And Sydney, to that point, the fact that you achieved Select Distinguished Club with that type of way of accepting members at their own pace is evidence that you don't need to pressure your members to complete projects so that you can achieve points. The district this year and last year has been members over metrics. It's about making the members feel comfortable, helping the members achieve their goal. And as a side effect, the club is going to achieve points because the member is going to see what they need to do for their personal circumstances to further their goals, which will help further the club as well. We are getting to the end of the interview. This has been some fantastic advice that you provided. I have so many notes here, and I hope everyone out there has taken notes. The good thing is this is a video, and you can rewind it and take some of those notes that you missed. For the conclusion, I'd like to pose the question, why should somebody visit your club, and how can they visit your club?
Well, why? Because we're Select Distinguished Toastmasters Club, which means that we take our members' growth seriously, and that we have a lot of fun. It's not a serious kind of club in that way, but we care about being a quality club and providing a quality experience for our members, and making sure that our members are progressing towards their own goals. And I think that's reflected in the Select Distinguished designation. Also, because we're a little bit small, there are more opportunities for people to speak. I know in some very large clubs, it's hard to get a speaking slot. And we make it easy for you to get a speaking slot. And because there aren't as many of us participating, but that's a good thing in a lot of ways. And I think we're actually a good club I think we're a great club as a primary club, but I think we're also a really good second club for people. I know a lot of Toastmasters who are in multiple clubs, and this is an easy club to join. And I think to be able to get more opportunities to see a different way of running a club, a different culture, although our clubs have slightly different cultures. So I think, and we are a fun club, so I think it's a good place to visit. It's only an hour at lunchtime, and it's on Zoom most of the time. Well, all the time it's on Zoom. Sometimes we're in person as well, but it makes it easy to fit into your day. And it's a good mix, I think, of really experienced Toastmasters and people who are newer. So that makes it interesting and fun as well. And the way to do it, just go to the website, to our club website, southcoast.toastmastersclubs.org, and all of our information is there. The Zoom link is right there on the home page, so you can just click on that, second and fourth Thursday of every month from noon to 1 p.m. And we'd love to see you there.
Thank you, Mary Ann. Any other concluding thoughts?
I was just thinking about the fact, we talk about, you're trying to fill roles at the agenda. You're trying to work through an education program. But because of the environment of the meetings, it's not like a work meeting. It's an oasis from the work meetings you go to. There's got to be like a separate name for the Zoom meetings that you want to go to. You want to go to a Toastmasters meeting. You don't want to go to your work meetings or many of the other things that you might have to do on Zoom. So it just ties into the whole, this is a comfortable place to be where you are going to work on your skills no matter what you put into it. And that you can just relax into that, like Sydney said.
I have to say, I've heard some of the best speeches that, people have given speeches that have taught me things. Mary Ann has taught me a lot of stuff. I'm like, wow, I didn't know I was going to learn this from a speech Toastmasters. And Stephen's an author. It's unbelievable. And he's actually given speeches that actually have touched me, where I could feel like what he went through. And I'm like, is this supposed to be happening? I just came here. Wow, this is amazing. You're sort of you're drawn in. So to have a small group with people who have, really, serious things to give speeches about, and the way they give it, and everybody's giving a different type of speech. So I'm like, so it becomes like it's a place to be. That's what I can say about South Coast Toastmasters. It's a place to be.
Sydney, South Coast Toastmasters, the place to be. Small but mighty, with seasoned Toastmasters to guide your experience in a fun, well-organized meeting. They're a family, encouraging each other to grow and achieve their goals, whether it's a new job that you are interviewing for, in entrepreneurship. They are going to help you achieve your goals. Learn member stories and tell your own stories when you attend the club, and they'll make a speaking slot for you. They're not one of these huge clubs. Join South Coast Toastmasters not meeting. Join their next Oasis on the second and fourth Thursday of the month from 12 to noon. I wish all of you the best Toastmaster year ever, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.